Hello, and welcome to Touchstone Music. This is continuing my series on music and record albums from the 1960s. These are albums I purchased when they were new in the 1960s, and which have continued to be musical touchstones for me ever since. Full disclosure, this video contains no music clips, only my commentary, but the last time I checked, the full album was available elsewhere on YouTube for you to listen to. Now, today's album is one of my absolute all-time favorite albums. Everybody knows This Is Nowhere by Neil Young. So Neil Young is arguably one of the most reviewed musicians of the past 50 years. There isn't much I'm going to be able to add to the absolute mountain of material that's already been written and spoken about him. He's one of the most prolific songwriters of the past half-century. He's consistently turned out high-quality tunes. His writing goes through phases, which seem to mirror his own life experiences. If I detect an overall theme, he chronicles the vagaries of the human heart, usually his own. He's a brilliant, restless performer, both electrically and acoustically. He seems unwilling or unable to stay in one place too long, always going in search of something new. Now, everybody knows This Is Nowhere is his second solo album. After the breakup of the successful 60s West Coast rock band Buffalo Springfield, of which he was a key member. Buffalo Springfield also included Stephen Stills, an absolutely brilliant American bluesman who would soon go on to form Crosby, Stills and Nash, later Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young when Young joined them, and Richie Furay, who would become a member of the seminal country rock group Poco. Young's first solo effort was a self-titled album called Neil Young, and it was released in January of 1969. Now, I recently listened to this album. I hadn't listened to it for a number of years. It has a lot of really good tunes on it. It has a kind of slick production values, kind of excellent studio musicians that you would expect, given his success as a in his previous rock band, Buffalo Springfield, that the record company would afford to him. But Young himself has said that he's very, or has been quoted as saying he was dissatisfied with the mix on the original vinyl record. And there have been several remixes since then, is my understanding, and I'm not sure which one I listened to. In May of 1969, May of the same year, Young released a second solo album, and that's the subject of today's review. Everybody knows This Is Nowhere. His backing band on this album consisted of three ex-members of a band called The Rockets. Denny Whitten on guitar, Billy Talbot on bass, and Ralph Molina on drums. The group was rechristened Crazy Horse. It became Young's backup band for the subsequent recording and tour, and they've really been his supporting band on and off ever since. So the studio for this recording was Wally Heider Studio 3 in Hollywood. The label was Reprise, and the producers are listed as Neil Young and David Briggs. David Briggs would go on to work with Neil Young as producer for many years. As for the title, its title actually comes from one of the song titles, not unusually. Now, Young is a transplanted Canadian, and he lived in the LA area, I think, since the band Buffalo Springfield first formed back in the mid-'60s. In fact, he liked it so much he purchased a ranch up there called the Broken Arrow Ranch property near La Honda, California. As it happens, I was in Los Angeles in the summer of 1974. I was visiting some friends up in Topanga Canyon, which is kind of on the north end of L.A. County. And we're in these sort of rolling hills, and we're at my friend's ranch, and he's pointing down the hill a bit, and he says, "See that ranch over there?" He says, "That's Neil Young's ranch." And I thought, well, that's interesting. So La Honda and I guess in Topanga must be near each other. I'm not quite sure how that works. I'm not that familiar with the geography. LA and the West Coast at that time were considered meccas both for would-be recording artists and for the alternate lifestyle that many bands represented for their fans. Now, I can't claim to see into Young's mind, but he seems to be expressing disenchantment with the LA scene in this song. His growing disenchantment would continue to be implied in many of his subsequent records in the following years. So the album cover is not an artistic rendering of some sort like some of the other album covers of the era, like some of the albums we've already looked at. But the grainy cover photo of a plaid-shirted Neil Young leaning against a tree with a dog sitting at his feet, I really liked the composition of the photo. And it struck me enough that I picked it out. I had no idea who Neil Young was. I vaguely had heard of Buffalo Springfield. I hadn't really followed them too much, except a couple of songs I'd heard on the radio. Took it into the sound booth, started listening to it, immediately purchased it. I haven't been disappointed. It's been one of my absolute favorite albums ever since. So my impressions at the time of purchase, my musical horizons were expanding as fast as new subgenres of music were being invented in those days. Young's album represented one of my main areas of interest, which is West Coast pop. His guitar playing certainly followed the mold of country rockers like his previous band, Buffalo Springfield and others. And I found it a refreshing change from the British blues rock, which I'd often immersed myself in those days. I didn't know who Neil Young was. No internet. But he was soon to become one of my favorite artists. Now, as a side note, a couple of years later, I had the pleasure of seeing Young live performing an acoustic set as a warm-up for an upcoming Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young tour, and that tour would later be chronicled in the live double album, Four-Way Street. And now, let's talk about the music. So side one begins with Cinnamon Girl. It's an electrified, infectious up-tempo rocker with wall of sound rhythm guitars and a thumping backbeat. It works perfectly to kick off the record. I want to live with a Cinnamon Girl. Young sings in a shaky voice. I would be happy for the rest of my life with a Cinnamon Girl, he assures us. Young's lyrics are often opaque. He seems to leave it to us to sort out what meaning they may have. Analyzing them too closely would probably take longer than we want to spend here. Allowing their meaning to slowly seep in osmotically with repeated listenings might, after all, be the best approach. Song 2 is the title track. Everybody knows this is Nowhere, and as I said before, it seems to indicate he is growing disenchantment with the LA scene, while his band croons supportively in the background. Fine country rock tune, by the way, could have graced any country rock album of that or any other era. The guitars jangle and twang satisfyingly, supplying a typical countrified ambiance, supported from below by Mouth Molina's steady, sparse drumming. Molina seems to sense when to fill the spaces left by the rest of the band, and when to get out of the way. The third song, Round and Round, is a mournful tune about love's lost and the mistakes that can accompany it. More of an acoustic number with Young accompanying himself with simple chords strummed on his acoustic guitar, possibly his Martin D45. Musical guest Robin Lane weaves in some subtle vocal harmonies. Very nice tune. I like it, but it's a downer. Side one ends with the epic Down by the River. This song was to become a staple in Young's live shows for many years, has inspired and been covered by numerous other artists ever since. It's another slow, dirge-like electric number, tells the story of a man shooting his lover down by the river. The actual death may be symbolic, just as the shooting may symbolize something else. Ongoing ambiguity in Young's lyrics draw people back for additional listenings. It's as if Young is reluctant to be too revealing. He prefers to treat his subject indirectly through metaphors, which seem to hint at something just beyond our understanding. The guitar break in this, by the way, is famous for starting off by repeating itself on the same note over and over. It begins about the 154 mark on my recording, and continues drone-like for a full 8 seconds. Eventually, the break evolves into a more familiar extended West Coast jam, counterpointed by excellent rhythm guitar and the bass drum duo of Talbot and Molina. So side two on the vinyl recording starts off with The Losing End. Young's folksy personal relating of the events of his day draws us in and makes us feel sympathy for this fellow whose love life is just not working out. Another fine country rock tune with spot-on instrumental and vocal accompaniment by Danny Whitten and Company. A hallmark of Young's roots rock songs is their lack of pretension. These are typically very simple songs which never profess to be more than they are. Running Dry, the next song, is another lament by Young. Many of his songs are more about regretful endings than hopeful beginnings. Accents are supplied by some fine fiddle work by guest player Bobby Notkoff, and especially by the reverb-heavy guitars. Lastly, another epic and future staple of the Young repertoire, Cowgirl in the Sand. Played as a medium-fast electric rocker here, Young has also recorded this song as an acoustic number in his singles act. Lots more West Coast-style guitar playing. The band is consistently inventive and interesting, and great tones from their overdriven amps. This is the best garage band ever. This album clocks in around 40 minutes, but not a moment of it is wasted. It's as near a perfect an offering as any recording I can think of. Neil has continued to utilize Crazy Horse as his house band over the decades. Tragically, Danny Whitten, Crazy Horse's guitarist and a songwriter of some note, passed away in November of 1972, aged only 29 after a battle with drug addiction. Neil Young has gone on to record many more famous albums and has passed through many phases in his career that stretches back through the 1960s. One of a handful of 1960s rockers whose music inspired the Seattle-based grunge movement in the 1990s. So now, maybe we know who also inspired all those plaid work shirts in the grunge bands in the 90s. Everybody knows This Is Nowhere is one of my favorite and most played albums of all time. It's still one of my favorite It is my favorite Neil Young album, and that's saying a lot because I have a lot of favorite Neil Young albums. This is still my absolute favorite. Thank you so much, Neil. It's a touchstone of my album collection that continues to inspire and entertain me after all these years, and I hope it will do the same for you. So that's all for this episode. Until next time, be well, and thanks for joining me. Mm-hmm.